Hey, Pastor Josh here. We're reading Acts chapter 21, 15 through 25, and we're going to do 3 days in one. Hopefully, I will stop this terrible habit of missing too many days, but it's just going to be best for me to do them all together. So we're doing October 18, 19, and 20 together in one video for you. So the first day, October 18th, we need to know that we need to serve God 1 minute at a time. Each of our days of service is made up of hours and it's made up of minutes. And really, we need to be thinking about serving the Lord every single minute that we have. The Apostle Paul is on his way to Jerusalem. I've made the connection to that famous Jaws theme music, the da da. He's getting closer and closer to Jerusalem, and these stops are supposed to give us that ominous feel. He's now been visiting various Christians as he's getting closer to Jerusalem. I think I said in previous videos that we don't know why exactly Paul is so eager to go to Jerusalem. Just not thinking well. The book of Acts really is not telling us why, but Corinthians does. The letter to the Corinthians really clearly tells us that Paul is going to Jerusalem because he has been collecting. He's been collecting offerings and gifts from all of the various churches of Galatia, Macedonia, and all of these churches, Galatian churches, or all these Gentile churches that he's been sharing with, and they're coming to Jerusalem with to help with the poor that are there. So they're coming with this massive monetary gift to the church in Jerusalem, and so that is one of Paul's major um, desires. That's why he's wanting to get to Jerusalem. So that's why he is on his way. We know that from the letters to the Corinthians. Later on in the book of Acts, when he is defending himself before one of the kings, he will end up saying that he was coming to Jerusalem to deliver a gift. So let us get into our reading. As he goes after these days, we got ready and went up to Jerusalem. And some of the disciples from Caesarea went with us, bringing us to the house of Mnason of Cyprus, an early disciple with whom we should lodge. So this is an early disciple. I remember Cyprus was that island that Paul and Barnabas went to on their first missionary journey. So then Paul visits James. When we had come to Jerusalem, the brothers received us gladly. On the following day, Paul went in with us to James, and all the elders were present. So this is a big deal. James is now the brother of Jesus, was not a believer during Jesus' ministry, but Paul is coming in to meet James. This is a big deal. James is the leader here of the church in Jerusalem, and it says all of the elders are present. So by implication, perhaps there are other apostles here as well, but definitely the leaders of the church in Jerusalem. After greeting them, he related one by one the things that God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. This is the whole idea of serving God 1 minute at a time. The Apostle Paul was telling James and telling all of the elders of the church of Jerusalem, here is what God has done through us. This is an attitude for us to adopt, that we really serve God one day, 1 minute, one moment at a time, and we get to recount those things over and over again and notice the result. And it's the same thing that happens with us. When they heard it, they glorified God. Wow, what a great work God is doing through Paul to these churches. And they said to him, you see, brothers, how many thousands there are among the Jews of those who have believed. So there are many Jews that have believed, and there's a problem. They are zealous for the law. Now, this is really a major problem the early church did have, is with Jews becoming Christians and then them still being so dedicated to the law, perhaps so dedicated to the law, that they think a person cannot get saved unless they are fulfilling the entire law. And for the Jews of this time, that one of the major things did involve circumcision. And so this would be a sin to avoid any sort of legalism, to think that when you add anything to Jesus, that it would help us get to heaven. No, we are saved through faith alone. We are saved through grace alone, through Christ alone. He is the one that saves us, not the law. And so they said there's many Jews that have believed, but they're zealous for the law. And they have been told about you that you teach all the Jews who are among the Gentiles to forsake Moses. They think you're a troublemaker, Paul, which that's not totally inaccurate, but they think you're telling them to forsake Moses, which Moses never told anybody to forsake Moses. Paul told people that they did not have to follow the law of Moses in order to be saved. And then they went on telling them not to circumcise their children or walk according to our customs. Of course, Paul did not teach that because he even had Timothy circumcised in his second missionary journey. So what then is to be done? Paul, you're not really liked even by the Christians that are among us. So they will certainly hear that you have come, and that they're not going to be really happy about it. So do therefore what we tell you. We agree with you. But we have a lot of believers that are young and they don't quite understand. So here's what you need to do. We have 4 men who are under a vow. Take these men and purify yourself along with them and pay their expenses so that they may shave their heads. So this is probably a Nazirite vow. Thus all will know that there is nothing in what they have told about you, but that you yourself also live in observance of the law. This should take care of it. They'll see that you're following the law. They'll see that you are not against the law, but in fact participating in lawful customs that are from Moses, and this should kind of help bridge the gap here. But as for the Gentiles who have believed, we've sent a letter with our judgment. They should abstain from what has been sacrificed to idols, from blood, from what has been strangled, and from sexual immorality. We saw that with the Great Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 15. So here they are recounting. We're going to go on to the next day's reading, 26 through 30. Main takeaway here, what I want to focus on is that we need to be sure that we know before we accuse. And we saw this in the reading that I was just reading through, is that they were making assumptions about the Apostle Paul that were not true. And so we need to make sure that we get the facts straight before we accuse, before we think things about people. We need to make sure we know the facts. The Apostle Paul was misrepresented. And if the Apostle Paul was misrepresented, I'm sure other people in your life could be misrepresented to you. So you got to make sure you get the facts straight. Verse 26. So interestingly enough, Paul's like, okay, this seems to be a decent plan. So Paul took them in, and the next day he purified himself along with them and went into the temple, giving notice when the days of purification would be fulfilled and the offering presented for each one of them. So he's following this law with these 4 men. He's paid the expenses for them. In verse 27, when the 7 days were almost complete, the Jews from Asia, seeing him in the temple, stirred up the whole crowd and laid hands on him. So these are folks that recognize the face. They say, this guy. And notice it's not the Christians that not the Jews that have become Christians that are zealous for the law. These are 100% fully Jews. They have not become Christians. So they're from Asia, in particular from Ephesus, seeing all the great problems that has happened there. And they then stir up the crowd, and they say, men of Israel, help us. This is the man who is teaching everyone everywhere against the people and the law and this place, which is not true. He's not teaching against it. He's just teaching that you are only saved through Christ alone, that the law does not bring about salvation. It is Christ alone. But of course, the Jews would not be accepting that at all. And so they are hot, they are angry, they are upset. And this would be the sin for us to avoid, is not getting the facts straight, to understand what the Apostle Paul really was teaching. Now, we understand more if it was actually the Jews saying this, because he would be, of course, teaching a break from Judaism, which Christianity is. We would say it's not a break of it. We would say it was the fulfillment of it. But moreover, but they're continuing to lie. Moreover, or misrepresent Paul. Moreover, he even brought Greeks into the temple and has defiled this holy place, which didn't happen, because we see the explanation here from Luke. For they had previously seen Trophimus the Ephesian with him in the city, and they suppose, you got to get your facts straight, right? They supposed that Paul had brought him into the temple, because this is going to cause a major mob So much so that Paul is going to be beaten, that if the Roman government did not intervene, he would have died. So they're just supposing that he brought a Greek into the temple. He did not. We got to get our facts straight before we start accusing people, even in our mind or with our mouths to other people. Get your facts straight. Verse 30, then all the city was stirred up, the entire city. And Jerusalem is being stirred up during a major festival. You've got a big problem in your hands. And the people ran together. They seized Paul, dragged him out of the temple, and at once the gates were shut. They dragged him out, closed the door, slammed the door behind him. And now they're bringing him out, and they are going to then proceed with beating him. And then with this reading, verse 31 through 40, God protects through unlikely ways. God is always protecting us. So even though Paul was spoken wrong of, God does end up protecting him, and he does it through an unlikely way. He does it through the Roman centurion. So let us continue our story, verse 31. And as they were seeking to kill him, so that's what the mob's goal was. They were going to kill the Apostle Paul. Word came to the tribune of the cohort that all Jerusalem was in confusion. Of course they were. He at once took soldiers and centurions and ran down to them. Here is God's provision of protection, his provision of help through the Roman centurions. And when they saw the tribune and the soldiers, they stopped beating Paul. So they stopped it when they said, we're caught. Verse 33, then the tribune came up and arrested him and ordered him to be bound with 2 chains. He inquired who he was and what he had done. Some in the crowd were shouting one thing, some another. It's just this confusion, this mob mentality, when nobody really knows what's going on. Somebody's saying this, somebody's that. The authority, the police officer, is not able to really understand what's even going on. And as he could not learn the facts because of the uproar, he ordered him to be brought in the barracks. So let's take him to the barracks. But it's interesting how Paul gets inside the barracks. And when he came to the steps, he was actually carried by the soldiers because of the violence of the crowd. So they're either pushing on him or whatnot. The soldiers actually had to grab him and actually carry him. Perhaps Paul is exhausted from the beatings. Perhaps the crowd is just so violent coming upon him that they actually had to carry him up there. Verse 36, for the mob of the people followed, crying out, away with him. They're done with him. They want this man killed. Verse 37, as Paul was about to be brought into the barracks, he said to the tribune, may I say something to you? He's saying it in Greek. And the Romans he's like, okay, do you speak Greek? You know Greek? I thought you were only speaking Hebrew. Perhaps you were an Egyptian. He didn't really know who this guy was. He didn't know who Paul was. May I say something to you? So he said it in Greek. And then the tribune said, do you know Greek? Are you not the Egyptian? So he was thinking, again, this whole idea that you need to get your facts straight beforehand. He didn't know. He thought that he was this other criminal, the Egyptian that had been talked about recently. Are you not the Egyptian then who recently stirred up a revolt and led the 4,000 men of the assassins out into the wilderness? No, Paul says, I'm not that person. Paul replied, I'm a Jew from Tarsus in Cilicia, a citizen of no obscure city. I beg you, permit me to speak to the people. Like, okay, I'll let you speak. And when he had given him permission, Paul, standing on the steps, motions with his hands. Like this is all the Apostle Paul. This is got him written all over. He's got this major mob stiddled together. He's going to stand up in Jerusalem and address these Jews that have gathered against him. He's done this in the synagogues all over Asia, Macedonia, Galatia, different places. He has done it over and over again. He is no stranger to this kind of environment. So he stands up and he motions with his hands. Can you see him getting up there all battered and bruised? I mean, they were about ready to kill this guy. He's been beaten so bad. He's waving them. He motioned with his hands to the people. And then there was a great hush. And when there was a great hush, he addressed them in the Hebrew language, which is key because this is a Jewish problem, and he's speaking to them as a brother. He was able to speak to the Roman tribune in Greek to let him know, hey, I'm not just anybody. I know Greek, and I can interact with you in the Greek language. And now he is then going to attempt to persuasively speak to the Jews that have gathered. As you can imagine, his speech is not going to end the best. Not because of what he said, not because he's not a good speaker, but because they are going to totally reject his message in totality. Remember, God provides protection through a multitude of different ways. The way that he's providing protection for the Apostle Paul is actually through the Roman government. He's going to be arrested. He's going to be taken all the way to Rome. He's going to be given the opportunity to testify for Christ. He's going to be given the opportunity to write letters that we have in our Bibles today because of Paul's imprisonment. We don't need to take that lightly. What the Apostle Paul went through, what the Lord had the Apostle Paul go through in order for us to receive some of the letters that we have even today. I pray that it's been a blessing to you, and I hope I will end the terrible habit of having to combine video readings together. Hopefully you'll start getting them on a daily basis from here on out. We will see. I make a promise, but remember it's a loose promise. I will try my hardest, and we'll see how that happens. I will see you all in the next video.